Is it true that some people ordain as Buddhist monks simply to run away from their worldly problems and issues that they have, instead of staying home and facing them? Having lived as a Buddhist monk for 6 years in Asia and Europe, I have to say, yeah, it does happen. But there's a good reason for that, and it can actually be really useful in some circumstances. As Westerners, running away from our problems is kind of taught as, yeah, you should not do that. You should face your fears dead on and just deal with it and do something about it. But having seen people who are suffering immensely from their daily lives, I also understand why that's not always a good idea to do like that. When I was ordained, I was mostly in Sri Lanka, because I was ordained in Sri Lanka. And in Sri Lanka, it's not openly considered okay to be gay. And I found a lot of gay Buddhist monks. A lot. I met quite a few people who it was obvious that they were gay, but they weren't allowed to be gay. So instead they turned to becoming a monk, because then you live without relationships, sexual relationships, and that part of it. And this is understandable. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I understand why they would do that, because their society doesn't accept it, so then they choose another option. I also met quite a few people who were Westerners who had all kinds of issues. Some of the times it was that they were gay and just couldn't consolidate that with their daily lives and what their surroundings expected from them. But other times it was that they had gone through something so difficult that they just couldn't deal with it. That could be anything from being bullied at school to feeling outcast to being just going into deep depressions or burnouts, or maybe they lost their jobs, their families. And then imagine going from feeling alone, feeling scared, and feeling like you have nowhere to go, to become part of a society where everyone focuses on making you feel loved, making you feel special, making you feel like you're doing something that's meaningful. For a lot of people, this is a great idea. It's not always best to straight on face our issues to the point where they overwhelm us and you can't deal with it. If you feel too bad, then yes, it can be a really good idea to not face those fears and instead go take a break. Go inwards a little bit and just see what is happening inside. Why am I feeling all of these things? Can I find stability in something else? Because if you would stay in everyday society, very likely you'd try to do the things you've been trying to do your entire life, which is like you want to become famous, you want to earn lots of money, you want to have a relationship, you want to be respected by your peers, and you have all these things that we in the West consider to be important to feel good, to feel happy. We need those things. And then you go into a completely different life where those things are considered almost bad. And that can be a really good thing, to get a break from that, to see that, hey, I don't need to have a partner to feel happy. I don't need to drink. I don't need to earn lots of money. I don't need to have an extravagant life. I don't need to have the newest telephone, the newest computer. I can be happy anyway. So if you approach it from that perspective, yeah, I think it's a really good idea. And I saw a lot of people who ordained and were broken. They could barely function. The amount of issues that people had when they ordained was just remarkable. But it was also remarkable to see how a year down the road, 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, they had completely changed. They had gone through a kind of metamorphosis because they took a break from doing what they had always done to say, okay, I'm going to try something else. And then they tried something else and they were happy people for it. So yes, there are lots of good things that can happen if you take a break away from society. I actually think I'd highly recommend everyone to just take a year off and live as a Buddhist monk. That would be, I think the world would be a better place. Not necessarily Buddhist monk. I mean, it doesn't matter what tradition you're ordained with. I'd say that the less religion and tradition that you have in whatever place you ordain is a good thing, so that you can focus more on going inwards and experiencing how you are relating to the world and slowing down and enjoying, being able to be in a beautiful place like I am here and actually enjoy standing here, looking at it, feeling what does it feel like to just see the vibrant colors of Sweden in fall, to hear the birds, to see the reflections, the shadows, everything that's just beautiful here, and really appreciating that and being able to do it more than 5 seconds and not needing to bring out your phone, but actually being here and experiencing our reality through our senses. Not the story around it, but through our senses. So for that reason, yes, it's a really good idea to get away. But there are some downsides to it also that we need to discuss, that I also saw. The problem is that if you do that, if you take yourself out of society and then live a life where you don't have the daily comforts of daily life, or you don't have a partner, you don't have a thing, then it's easy to believe that, oh, that's the answer to happiness. Everyone should live as a Buddhist monk. And people often came up to me when I lived as a monk and said, hey, it wouldn't work if everyone became a Buddhist monk, because then no one would make babies and we would just die out as a species. I'm like, yeah, well, that's not really the point. It's not that everyone should become monks and just not have babies and that there's anything wrong with sex. It's that that's a good way to take a break, to get away, to be able to practice inwards. So the downside becomes that people who then save themselves by doing this, I mean literally in some cases save themselves. I've also known, unfortunately, more than one monk and nun who committed suicide because they were just in so much pain that they couldn't handle it. It's not that it's a solution to all your issues, but it can be a really good way to take a break and get away. And then if you do that, it's easy for you to believe that, oh, I get it, everyone should live like this. Everyone should have less comfortable things in their life. No one, and telephones are bad, Facebook is bad, YouTube is bad, like all these things are bad, and we tend to make out like the things on the outside as the important thing, and missing the point that it's how we relate to those things on the outside that is the important thing. Being in an environment that is made to calm you down, to make you focus on being here and appreciating what you have around you, well, that's a really good place to practice. But that doesn't mean that's the only place you can practice. That also doesn't mean that that's the best way for everyone to live. So we need to separate that, and the people who go into it feeling really bad and they do that, one of the downsides is that they will very often believe that, yes, Buddhism saved me, this is the right way to live life, instead of seeing that, yes, I got out of my daily life like I lived it, and I did something else for a while that was highly focused, highly supported by other people. It would not be possible if everyone lived like that. And thanks to that, I feel better. But now I need to go back into society and live as a normal person and see what is it like to then face all these difficult things again. Because otherwise, like we started out this video, yes, you're just running away from your issues and problems, and you haven't actually faced what does it feel like to come face to face with this fear of being vulnerable, of being open, of letting people see who you are, whoever that may be. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. If we're talking about sexual preference, if we're talking about what color you like, or what kind of way you like dressing yourself, or what you like to do for work. It might be that you're doing something you absolutely hate but everyone tells you to, or how you live your life might not at all be what you actually like. So you need to come out of that cocoon and go into a metamorphosis and become who you are. And that is something that can be difficult for some people who escape into Buddhism. Not into Buddhism, but into living a monastic life. Now, the other thing that can also cause an issue, not just for you, well, mostly for other people, is that imagine if you have someone who feels so bad and who is so broken, who could barely handle themselves, and then they put on monk robes, and all of a sudden everyone worships you, everyone thinks you're special, and they come to you for advice. It might be that you're not the best person to ask for advice at that time. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be an amazing person to ask for advice when you've gone through this, but what tends to happen to people is that they have some kind of experience, they have some kind of step forward and something that goes better than it did before, or they experience something and then they say, oh, I get it now. This is how it is, and they start teaching and they start helping other people. They start a YouTube channel after having their first meditational experience and think they're now halfway to enlightenment or fully enlightened. And they don't see that there's so much more left. So a downside to doing this is that they might jump to conclusions as to why and how good their own practice is, since people ask them for advice. And that's one of the advantages of being in a tradition such as Buddhism, is because depending on where you are, you're not actually supposed to teach other people in the beginning. People will still ask you for help. People will still ask you for advice. but there's restrictions on how you do that in the beginning, which is a good thing. You should take your time for that. You don't need to necessarily ordain as a monk. You don't need to run away. There are many, many good ways of practicing at home. And one of the absolutely best and easiest ways to do this is breathing meditation. There are different ways you can do this, but I have developed my own way that I think is really useful, not for getting crazy meditational experiences, but for learning how to cope with difficult emotions and difficult situations that come up. And not just in the moment, but actually looking at those things and letting go of the core part of us that is distorting, pushing against the world around us, creating these issues for you. If you want to learn more about how to do this by yourself at home, I made a video where I cover all the advantages of how to do this, and you can watch it here. And there's even a link to another video where I go through an exercise and you can do it for yourself at home.